The first time the alien woman kicked him, the sound of her armored boot meeting his ribs echoed across the dusty arena. Her skin was deep blue, her hair silver white, and her eyes burned with challenge. The crowd expected him to collapse, to cry out, to admit defeat. Instead, the human gritted his teeth and looked up at her with something almost like gratitude. War had come without warning. The desert colonies were supposed to be neutral territory, a place where humans and alien clans traded goods under uneasy peace. That peace shattered when the Red Fang mercenaries attacked a settlement on the edge of the dunes. Among their prisoners was Captain Elias Varon, a soldier who had been caught scouting alone. The aliens believed breaking him in front of the crowd would break the spirit of his people. The woman facing him was called Koresh. She was a champion fighter of her clan, feared across the desert for her speed and ruthless precision. Every movement she made was a calculated strike, each step heavy with confidence. She did not know that the man she faced had fought battles in worse places, against worse odds, and survived every one. His chest ached from the earlier blows, and he knew one rib had cracked. Yet his gaze did not waver. Koresh circled him slowly, her curved blade glinting in the sunlight. Around them, the golden dust rose in shimmering swirls. The crowd shouted in her language, urging her to finish it. Elias could feel the rhythm of her steps, the way she shifted her weight before every strike. She was measuring him, deciding where to land the next kick. He stayed low, waiting for the moment she thought she had already won. When her leg shot forward again, he didn't move. The impact drove the air from his lungs, but instead of pain, he felt a strange relief. The bone had snapped back into place under the force, and the stabbing ache in his side was gone. He coughed once, then smiled at her through the dust. Koresh froze for a heartbeat, her eyes narrowing as she realized he was not broken. Her opponent had just thanked her with his expression. The crowd did not understand what had happened, but they saw something shift. Elias rose to his feet, still holding his side, but standing taller than before. His presence seemed heavier now, as if the kick had awakened something in him instead of weakening him. Koresh's blade twitched in her grip, her stance adjusting. She had trained for years to face warriors who feared her. She was now facing one who welcomed the fight. Elias's voice was calm when he spoke. His words were in her language, though his accent was sharp. "That was a good kick," he said. "Now let's see what you can really do." The crowd gasped, the sound rippling like wind through the dunes. Koresh's eyes flashed with something. That was not just anger but interest. She had not expected her opponent to speak her tongue, nor to taunt her in front of her people. The arena floor shimmered in the heat. The air smelled of dust and metal. Above them, the red banners of the mercenaries whipped in the wind, marking this fight as theirs. But neither fighter looked at the banners now. All that existed was the space between them, the distance that would close in the next heartbeat. Koresh adjusted her grip on the blade. Elias steadied his stance. The real fight was only about to begin. Koresh's eyes narrowed as the human steadied himself, her warrior instincts alert to the shift in his presence. The way he moved told her that the earlier blow had not weakened him but made him more dangerous. She had faced strong opponents before, but none who looked at her like this. Elias's stance was balanced, his breathing controlled, his gaze locked on hers. The crowd sensed the change, and their chants faltered. She darted forward with sudden speed, her blade sweeping low toward his legs. Elias pivoted, letting the edge cut through the air where his knee had been. He stepped inside her guard, forcing her to retreat or risk being trapped. Koresh moved lightly, her boots kicking up arcs of golden sand. Each step was precise, each movement honed by years of training. She circled again, studying the man who would not break. Elias knew that matching her speed was impossible. She had the advantage in agility, and he would lose if he tried to chase her pace. Instead, he waited for her to come to him. His eyes followed the subtle shifts in her shoulders, the twitch of her fingers around the hilt. The sun pressed down on them both, baking the arena floor until the air shimmered. His cracked rib throbbed with each breath, but the pain was a guide now, not a weakness. Koresh feinted left, then slashed high from the right. Elias caught her wrist with his left hand, twisting just enough to unbalance her. The crowd roared in surprise as their champion stumbled. She recovered instantly, spinning to bring her boot up toward his head. He ducked under it, feeling the rush of air as it passed. She landed lightly, her eyes burning brighter. It was no longer just a match for the crowd. This was becoming personal. Her next strike was faster, aimed to end it. She came at him in a blur, blade high, knee driving forward. Elias turned into the blow, his arm catching her leg at the thigh. Sand exploded around them as he pushed her. Off balance again. She hit the ground on one knee, not from weakness but from surprise. Her lips curled in something between a snarl and a smile. Few had ever dared throw her off her footing twice. Elias stepped back, giving her space. The crowd began chanting her name louder now, urging her to destroy him. She rose slowly, her posture shifting from measured precision to something more primal. Her movements became unpredictable, her strikes less about form and more about force. Elias adjusted, his body remembering every brawl and battle he had fought in dusty outposts and dark alleys. He let her come close, then countered with quick bursts of power. The duel began to blur in speed. Blades flashed, boots struck, and the sand churned under their feet. The sound of each impact echoed against the high walls of the arena. Elias felt the sting of shallow cuts along his arm and side, but they only sharpened his focus. Koresh's breathing deepened, her chest rising and falling under the straps of her armor. She could feel his endurance, and it unsettled her. She had expected him to fade by now. A sudden opening appeared when Koresh lunged too far. Elias stepped inside, his hand locking around her weapon arm. With his other hand, he caught her by the shoulder and spun her toward the arena wall. She broke free before hitting it, flipping in the air and landing on her feet. The crowd erupted in a wave of sound. Both fighters stood still for a heartbeat, breathing hard, eyes locked. In that pause, something unspoken passed between them. It was respect, but not surrender. Koresh understood now that this fight would not be won with a single strike. She would need every skill she had, every trick she knew, to bring him down. Elias recognized the same truth. The duel was no longer about the mercenary spectacle. It was about proving something to each other. Around them, the shouts of the crowd faded into background noise. Only the fight remained. Koresh shifted, her grip on the blade, the sunlight glinting along its edge. Elias straightened, ready for whatever came next. The air between them felt charged, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, they moved again, two warriors in perfect opposition, each strike met with equal force. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Neither would stop until the other could rise no more. The sun beat down on the arena, turning the golden sand into a searing floor beneath their boots. Heat shimmered in the air, making their movements blur at the edges. Koresh's breathing slowed as she recalculated her approach. Elias's stance was low, his hands ready, his eyes locked on her. They circled each other with the awareness of predators waiting for the other to strike first. Koresh lunged suddenly, her blade flashing toward his shoulder. Elias pivoted aside, grabbing her wrist and pulling her forward. She twisted free with a sharp turn, letting his grip slide off. The crowd roared at the display, dust clouds swirling with every step they took. She came at him again with a sweeping kick, aiming for his chest. He caught it on his forearm and pushed her leg aside before she could land. A follow-up blow. The sound of their strikes carried beyond the walls. Each impact was sharp, echoing through the stone and sand. Koresh feinted to his right, forcing him to shift his balance. She then spun to his left, her boot driving into his thigh. The hit staggered him, but he held his ground. Elias's expression hardened as he stepped closer, cutting off her room to maneuver. She could feel the pressure building as his presence grew heavier. He reached for her arm, but she ducked under his grasp and drove her elbow into his ribs. It was the same side she had struck before, testing whether the earlier injury remained. Instead of faltering, Elias used the impact to turn his body and hook his arm around her waist. He lifted her briefly before she kicked free, landing light on her feet again. The exchange left them both breathing harder, their focus unbroken. The crowd's chanting shifted into a rhythm, the beat matching the pounding of Koresh's pulse. She felt the weight of their expectations, but also the thrill of facing someone who refused to fall. Elias was strong in ways she had not anticipated. His endurance made him dangerous, and she knew she could not let the fight drag on too long. She pressed forward with faster, sharper attacks, trying to overwhelm him with speed. Elias weathered the flurry, blocking where he could and absorbing the rest. He let her push him back toward the edge of the arena, his boots grinding into the 2A hot sand. Just when it seemed she had him cornered, he shifted his weight and stepped inside her reach. His fist came up in a tight arc, striking her shoulder hard enough to spin her sideways. She slid back a step, her grip tightening on her blade. She grinned despite the sting, her teeth flashing white against her blue skin. The fight was becoming something neither of them wanted to end too quickly. Koresh adjusted her stance, lowering her center of gravity. Elias mirrored the change, reading her movements. Both fighters understood the next exchange could shift the balance. The arena seemed to shrink around them as the tension drew tighter. Koresh moved first, her speed blinding. Her blade cut toward his side, and he turned into the attack, letting it graze his shirt without breaking skin. His hand shot up to grab her wrist again, but this time she rolled her entire body forward, pulling him with her. The motion brought them both to the ground, sand spraying into the air. They separated quickly, each regaining their footing in the same breath. The crowd erupted with excitement at the sudden fall. Koresh felt the heat of the sand on her palms before she rose again. Elias dusted his hands and squared his shoulders, his eyes never leaving hers. The air between them was heavy with unspoken understanding. This was no longer about a staged spectacle. It was a test, a clash of wills neither wanted to lose. She shifted her blade to her other hand, surprising him with the change. Elias narrowed his eyes, adjusting to the new angle of attack. Around them, the sun dipped slightly, casting long shadows over the arena. The heat did not lessen, but the light sharpened, making every movement stand out. They moved again, both quick and unrelenting. The next moments would decide which of them controlled the fight from here. Asterisk, the clash of boots and blades continued. Each strike met with equal force. Koresh pressed forward, testing every gap in his guard. Elias met her speed with perfect timing, blocking and countering with controlled precision. The air between them burned with heat and tension. The crowd leaned closer, their voices a wall of noise behind the fighters. Koresh spun low, sweeping her leg toward his ankles. Elias jumped back, avoiding the sweep by inches. He landed lightly and stepped in with a quick jab to her side. She twisted her torso, letting the strike glance off her armor. The sun flashed on her silver hair as she moved, her speed turning each motion into a blur. Elias's eyes followed her every shift, never letting her vanish from his focus. The sand beneath them shifted constantly, slowing movement and forcing careful steps. Koresh used the uneven ground to her advantage, striking from angles that made balance difficult. Elias kept adjusting, grounding himself after every hit. She could see his endurance, and it irritated her. Most opponents began to fade under her attacks by now. He was still standing, still ready, still watching for an opening. She lunged high, blade aimed for his neck. Elias caught her arm at the elbow, and forced it upward. Her other hand shot forward, palm striking his chest. The impact pushed him back 2 steps, the crowd shouting at the sudden burst of force. Elias steadied himself quickly, his boots digging deep into the sand. His breathing was heavier now, but his stance remained solid. Koresh stepped in again, her strikes coming faster. Elias deflected most with his forearms, letting a few land to draw her closer. He caught her by the wrist and twisted sharply, making her release the blade. It fell into the sand between them. She did not hesitate. Instead of diving for the weapon, she drove her knee into his side, the same spot she had struck earlier. The force bent him forward, but he caught her leg before she could retreat. He spun her off balance, sending her stumbling toward the edge of the arena. She slid to a stop, sand spraying up around her. The crowd erupted at the reversal. Koresh rose quickly, brushing the grit from her armor. Her eyes locked on him again, sharper than before. He had disarmed her once. She would not let it happen again without taking something from him in return. Elias did not rush her. He stood in the center, letting her decide the next move. She darted in, retrieving her blade from the sand. The grip was warm under her fingers, the weight familiar. She spun it once and came at him again, her steps faster, her blade cutting through the air. Elias caught the rhythm, matching her pace, his body moving as if he had trained for this duel his entire life. Each strike rang with the clash of steel against hardened forearms. The smell of metal and dust filled the air. Koresh's hair clung to her damp skin under the relentless heat. Elias's shirt was torn, revealing bruises and cuts across his torso. Neither slowed, neither broke. The crowd's chants rose and fell in waves, matching the tempo of their fight. The battle had become a dance of speed, strength, and will. Koresh stepped in close, her blade angled low. Elias turned his body to catch the strike on his side instead of his chest. His arm shot up, gripping her shoulder tightly. She twisted to break free, slicing upward. The blade caught the edge of his arm, drawing a thin line of blood. He didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled her in closer, their faces inches apart. She could see the determination in his eyes, the refusal to yield. She broke free with a sharp shove, putting distance between them. The sunlight caught the fine grains of sand drifting in the air. Both fighters were breathing hard now, each step heavier than before. But neither stepped back. The arena felt smaller, the walls closing in. Every movement was measured, every strike carrying the weight of survival. The next exchange would decide the flow of the battle to come. The heat in the arena seemed to press heavier with every passing moment. Koresh felt the sting of sweat on her skin, the grip of her blade dampen her hand. Elias's breathing was rough but steady, his eyes never straying from hers. The crowd's shouts faded into a low hum as both fighters focused only on each other. Koresh stepped forward, her movements sharp and deliberate. She feinted a high strike, then cut low toward his leg. Elias turned his foot just in time, the blade slicing only cloth. He countered with a fast punch toward her side, but she caught it on her forearm and pushed him back. Sand shifted under them, their boots grinding deep with each move. Elias advanced next, his steps slow but unyielding. He swung his arm low, trying to sweep her off balance. Koresh leapt over the attempt, landing lightly behind him. She spun and aimed for his back, but he turned in time to meet her strike with his forearm. The impact jolted through both of them. Neither backed away, locked in a moment of raw strength. She broke the lock with a sudden twist, pulling his arm to one side. Her knee came up toward his ribs, but he caught her leg before the blow could land. With a sharp push, he sent her stumbling back several steps. The crowd roared at the reversal. Koresh steadied herself, her jaw tightening. She was beginning to see how difficult it would be to break him. They moved again, trading blows in a blur. Elias blocked a slash to his shoulder, then ducked under a spinning kick. His counterstrike came in the form of a straight punch to her chest armor, forcing her back. Koresh's breath hitched, the hit rattling through her. But her eyes burned brighter, fueled by the challenge he presented. She had never faced a human who fought like this. Koresh adjusted her grip and charged. Her blade cut through the air with precision, each strike aimed to force him to the edge. Elias absorbed the hits that he could not dodge, stepping sideways to keep his position. His arms and chest bore fresh marks from her blade, but his focus did not falter. Each exchange made his stance stronger, his timing sharper. The sound of steel and flesh meeting echoed through the arena. The sand clung to their boots and legs, each step harder than the last. Koresh's strikes grew more forceful, testing his endurance. Elias responded by stepping into her attacks, closing the distance until their movements became a tight, dangerous struggle. The crowd roared with every close call. She aimed for his arm again, but he caught her wrist, twisting her blade away. His other hand pushed her shoulder, spinning her to the side. She recovered instantly, slashing upward in a motion that forced him to lean back. The edge of the blade passed inches from his chest. Both fighters knew one mistake could end it. That knowledge only pushed them harder. Elias ducked under another strike and drove his shoulder into her midsection. The hit knocked her back a step, but she kept her footing. Her counter came quick, a slice aimed at his leg. He stepped back just enough to avoid it, then lunged forward with a hook to her ribs. She absorbed the blow, gritting her teeth as she shoved him away. Their breathing was heavy now, each inhale loud in the silence between strikes. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sand. Koresh tightened her grip on the blade, feeling the weight of the fight settle into her bones. Elias rolled his shoulders, preparing himself for the next exchange. The battle was not yet decided, and neither was willing to fall first. The arena had grown silent except for the sound of their footsteps in the sand. The crowd was watching with wide eyes, waiting for one of them to falter. Koresh's hair clung to her face, damp from sweat, but her eyes stayed locked on Elias. He looked just as worn, yet no weaker than before. Every breath between them felt like a challenge. Koresh shifted her stance, lowering herself for speed. She darted forward, blade aimed at his left shoulder. Elias moved sideways, catching her wrist and twisting hard. She yanked free and spun low, sweeping her leg toward his knees. He stepped over it, countering with a sharp elbow toward her back. She rolled forward and regained her footing without giving him an opening. The sand under their boots shifted constantly, making each step harder to control. Koresh tried to use the uneven ground to force him into mistakes. She moved in quick bursts, striking from unexpected angles. Elias met each attack with a block or a shift, his body adapting to her rhythm. She could see in his eyes that he was reading her movements, preparing for something decisive. Elias closed the gap suddenly, catching her off guard. His left arm hooked around hers, pulling her toward him. She dropped her weight and twisted, breaking the hold. Before he could adjust, her blade came up, stopping just short of his throat. For a heartbeat, the crowd thought it was over. But she stepped back, letting the fight continue. She wanted to win without luck deciding the outcome. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of her skill. The respect between them was clear now, even as their weapons moved to strike again. Koresh slashed high, then low, forcing him to move fast. Elias blocked each strike with precision, his arms straining under the force. The heat around them was thick, the air shimmering under the glare of the sun. Koresh feinted to the side, then lunged in with her shoulder. The impact drove Elias back a step, but he caught her by the waist and spun them both, reversing their positions. She struck at his ribs with the back of her elbow, and he let her go to avoid a deeper hit. Both fighters stepped back, catching their breath, their eyes never leaving each other. The tension in the arena rose again as they closed in for another exchange. Elias's strikes were slower now but carried more weight. Koresh moved faster, weaving between his attacks to land quick cuts across his arms. The bruises on his body told the story of her precision, but the steadiness in his movements told her he was far from finished. She drove forward with a sudden burst of speed, her blade slashing toward his side. Elias caught her wrist mid-swing, twisting it outward. The blade slipped slightly in her grip, but she held on. His free hand came up in a short, heavy punch to her shoulder, forcing her back a step. Her eyes narrowed, the thrill of the fight. Pushing her harder, their movements became a blur of steel and muscle, sand spraying with every step. The sound of each impact rang against the arena walls. Koresh's arms ached, but she forced herself to press the attack. Elias's cuts bled, lightly streaking across his skin, yet he stood firm. The fight had become more than skill against skill. It was will against will. Koresh spun away from his latest strike, letting the blade miss by inches. She landed facing him again, breathing hard but smiling faintly. Elias gave the smallest of nods before stepping in once more. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the fight was nearing a turning point. Both fighters moved with the certainty that the next moments would decide the shape of what came after. The sun hung lower in the sky, turning the desert air into a haze of gold and red. Shadows stretched across the arena floor, weaving between the fighters' feet. Koresh's muscles burned from the endless exchanges, but her resolve burned hotter. Elias looked no less determined, his chest rising and falling in deep, controlled breaths. The space between them felt charged with something greater than the fight itself. Koresh moved first, her boots digging into the sand as she lunged forward. Her blade swept high toward his head, forcing him to step back. He caught her second strike on his forearm and pushed her aside with a heavy shove. She twisted with the motion, regaining balance and spinning low to target his legs. He jumped. Clear, landing with both fists raised in readiness. Elias advanced, his movements deliberate. He jabbed with quick, short punches meant to test her guard. Koresh deflected with the flat of her blade, each impact sending a vibration up her arm. She stepped sideways, trying to draw him into a trap. He refused to be baited, instead pressing forward in a tight line that gave her little room to maneuver. The crowd was restless now, their voices rising with every exchange. Dust swirled up from the sand, clinging to sweat and armor. Koresh could feel the grit in her mouth as she gritted her teeth against the pressure of his attacks. Elias swung for her side, but she slipped away, using his momentum to slash across his forearm. The cut was shallow, but it forced him to shift his stance. He wiped the blood quickly with the back of his hand and came at her again. This time his pace increased, his strikes harder and less predictable. Koresh met him blow for blow, her blade moving in arcs that flashed under the dying sun. The rhythm of the fight quickened, the moments between attack and counter shrinking, until neither could afford to blink. Koresh stepped in close, feinting high before aiming low at his ribs. Elias caught her wrist again, but she used her free hand to strike at his jaw. He blocked with his shoulder and pushed her away, creating space. Her boots slid across the sand before she steadied herself. The crowd's roar followed every move, their energy feeding into the fighters. Elias launched forward with a powerful rush. His arm hooked under hers, lifting her slightly before setting her down off balance. She twisted out of his grip and spun into a low slash. The blade grazed his side, drawing another line of red. He did not flinch, instead using the moment to close the gap again. Their bodies collided, the clash of armor and muscle echoing through the arena. Koresh shoved him back with all her strength, her eyes locked on his. They were both breathing hard now, their movements carrying the weight of exhaustion. Still, neither slowed. She slashed forward, aiming for speed over power. Elias deflected with sharp, efficient blocks, letting her tire herself against his defense. The tension was tight as wire, ready to snap with the next decisive move. the sound of their boots grinding in the sand was almost as loud as the crowd. Elias stepped in, faking a right hook before striking with his left. Koresh barely caught it in time, her blade pushing his arm away. She countered with a swift kick to his thigh, the impact forcing him back half a step. His lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile before he charged again. They met in the center of the arena, neither giving ground. Blades clashed, fists struck, and the sand exploded around them. The heat of the day mixed with the heat of the fight, wrapping them both in an unyielding haze. As the sun dipped lower, it painted them in fire and shadow. The next exchange would either end the fight or set the stage for its final and most dangerous moment. The arena was drowning in the roar of the crowd, but Elias and Koresh heard none of it. Every heartbeat was a drum in their ears, every breath a push against exhaustion. The sun had dropped low, its golden light cutting sharp lines across their faces. Sand clung to their skin and armor like a second layer, proof of the battle they had fought. Koresh's grip tightened on her blade. Her chest rose and fell in deep, steady breaths. She had fought to win, but now she understood this was about more than victory. Elias stood ready, his fists lifted, his gaze locked on hers. His cuts bled in thin lines across his arms and side, yet his stance held firm. Both knew the next exchange could be the last. Koresh lunged first, the air splitting around her blade. Elias stepped aside, his arm shooting out to grab her wrist. She twisted free and drove her knee toward his ribs. The strike landed, forcing a grunt from him, but he did not step back. Instead, he caught her shoulder and pulled her in, delivering a short, heavy blow to her midsection. She staggered, but her eyes burned brighter. Elias pressed forward, sensing the shift. His fists moved in quick, heavy arcs, each one forcing her to step back. Koresh parried the blows she could, but the force was driving her toward the arena's edge. She kicked forward, aiming for his chest, but he sidestepped and caught her leg. With a twist, he sent her rolling into the sand. She rose instantly, refusing to stay down. The crowd's roar swelled, sensing the fight reaching its peak. Koresh came at him again, her strikes a storm of speed and precision. Elias blocked, deflected, and countered, the rhythm of their fight as sharp as ever. She cut toward his shoulder, and he caught the blade on his forearm, letting it slice into the leather wrap. He stepped in, closing the distance until their eyes were level. Her breathing was ragged, but she did not slow. She struck again, this time aiming for his neck. He ducked low, his arm hooking under hers and spinning her off balance. She landed hard on one knee, sand grinding into her skin. Elias stepped back, giving her the choice to rise. She took it. Without hesitation, standing tall once more. The respect between them was now undeniable. They moved together one final time. Koresh's blade swept high. Elias's arm deflected it, and his other hand caught her at the waist. He pulled her in and drove his shoulder into her, sending her backward. She dropped her weapon, the steel landing in the sand. Before she could retrieve it, he stepped in and locked his arms around hers, holding her in place. She struggled, but his grip was unbreakable. The referee's voice cut through the noise, declaring the match ended. Elias released her slowly, stepping back with his hands raised. Koresh stood still for a moment, her chest rising fast, before reaching down to pick up her blade. She sheathed it and turned to face him fully. The crowd was on its feet, shouting both their names. For the first time in the match, Koresh smiled. "You fought well," she said in her own language. Elias replied in the same tongue, "So did you." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in threat but in thought. He had given her something rare, an opponent who did not fear her, did not yield to her skill, and yet did not hate her for the blows exchanged. In her world, that was almost a bond. As the sun dipped behind the dunes, their shadows stretched long across the arena. The mercenaries who had arranged the fight were speaking among themselves, their plans shifting in the wake of what they had seen. Neither fighter cared for their schemes now. For Koresh and Elias, the battle had decided something beyond the crowd's cheers. It had decided that neither would forget the other.